Check 1, 2. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Royal We Fellowship. It's a beautiful morning here. We're getting into spring, and sorry, I'm running a little bit behind today. A few minutes behind as I was getting some stuff set up. Having a little bit of trouble here with the interwebs and getting it ready to go. But we are up and rolling. And so, good morning, Shabbat Shalom, Royal We Fellowship. Before we begin, if you are new to Royal We Fellowship, welcome. We are taking a look at the ancient literature, and we're applying our understanding of the toxicity of the world, of narcissism, into the ancient literature. And I'm very excited to be here with you. A couple of announcements. If you would like to support Royal We Fellowship, you can go ahead and do so by clicking the PayPal link for donating down below. Your donations, your support of Royal We Fellowship is inspired. It's not required. There is no requirements for being here other than just being ready and willing with an open heart to learn about what the ancient literature has to say about the world that we live in and the people who we are surrounded with in this world. Also, if you don't already know, I am on Instagram at Join the Royal We. And on Instagram, I'm going to be sharing more of just my personal daily life. I'm right now getting ready to rappel down 19 stories in downtown St. Louis in order to face a fear of mine. And I believe that it's important that we face our fears in life. And I believe in the ancient literature of the Bible, God has people facing fears all the time. If you would like to sponsor me in that and support that, you're welcome to do so. There are links down below and in my organic Royal We videos that will allow you to sponsor that effort and be a part of that. And in addition to that, it's just good to be able to connect with you on Instagram. Again, that's at Join the Royal We on Instagram. So let's go ahead, since we're already late, let's go ahead and jump right into what is going on with where we're at. Now, we have spent a lot of time. We've already followed Abraham. We have followed Isaac. We have followed now Jacob. And now we are into Jacob's sons. And now all of this is going to end up being the tribes in which we get to the Newer Testament, which it talks about the coming of the Messiah, of Jesus. It all comes down through this line. Now we're going to discover that this line is far from perfect, right? We've already seen that. We're going to see even more the wickedness that consumes people. Now, we already read last week that Joseph's brothers conspired against him to kill him. Joseph was the one son of both of Jacob, his father Jacob, and Rachel. Jacob loved Rachel more than any other, but God had closed the womb of Rachel and instead had Leah, his other wife, had all kinds of children. So these became Joseph's half brothers, Reuben, Judah, Simeon, and all these other brothers. And now Joseph was the youngest and was also the son of Jacob and Rachel. Joseph had radical dreams. Joseph dreamt that he was going to be a ruler. In so many words, that's what he was saying. The half brothers, if you will, became jealous. They didn't like Joseph. And we talked about this. Not only were they jealous because their younger brother had such visions and dreams, but last week we also saw that the older brothers, Reuben and Judah and Simeon and them, they were all older. They were older than Joseph. So they already had a clique. They already had their association, and Joseph was left out. Joseph was on his own. Joseph was the younger brother who had nothing but to be the best servant he could be to his father Jacob, which is what he was. He went out and he reported what he saw his older brothers doing back to his dad, back to Jacob. So he would tell Jacob, Reuben and them, they're supposed to be watching the flocks out there, but they're out there sleeping. They're out there kicking rocks. I just wanted to report. So he found his place with his dad in just being able to be honest and communicate in that way. How many of you know this made his brothers hate him even more, right? Now little Joseph was a snitch. So they conspired to kill him. Now, instead of killing him, we saw last week, what they did was they conceived a plan, and it was actually Judah. Judah was one of Joseph's older brothers, While Reuben was gone, Judah said, let's not kill him. Let's instead sell him away to these people who are on their way to Egypt. That was Judah's plan. Now, after this happened, they contrived the story. They made up the story as they went back to their dad. Okay, they went back to Jacob. They dipped Joseph's coat, his robe that his dad gave him. They dipped it in goat's blood, went back to Jacob and said, listen, your son, we don't know where your son is, but we found this robe. Does this robe belong? Does this coat, does this belong to Joseph? And it was dipped in blood. And sure enough, Jacob was torn. His heart was broken. His only son, his young son Joseph, who was from Rachel, was gone. And so he was very upset. He also had another younger brother, Benjamin, with Rachel. But the jury is still out as to whether or not Jacob believed the brother's story or not. There's a lot of theological debate. Some say that Jacob didn't believe it, didn't buy it, that he understood that his younger sons, the half-brothers of Joseph, had something to do with the disappearance of Joseph. And so, either way, Jacob was torn. He ripped his clothing. He was crying. He was a mess. He was an absolute mess. This disjolted the whole family. And so now we're going to pick up in chapter 38. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and open up with me. Chapter 38. At that time, and so what time is it? It's the time where Joseph is no more. Joseph's been sold into slavery. All the other brothers are there. Judah and Simeon and Reuben and all the others. Jacob, Rachel. And Jacob's a mess. He would not be comforted by anybody. So you could see the family is just torn and disjolted. It's no longer together. It's no longer together. Jacob, or Israel is his name now, most likely is not talking to any of them. It's a disappearance, and anybody who loses a child, it's very difficult to move on in that way. So it's very difficult. Not only that, but the brothers, Judah and Simeon and Reuben, carried with them the guilt and the shame of knowing they did it, knowing they got rid of Joseph. It carried them, it burdened them down. So you can imagine that household was very dysfunctional. It was very torn. It was very fake. They were living in a lie. It was very, very ugly, a very ugly family to be in, a very ugly moment to live in. And so what we see in chapter 38, verse 1 is that Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. Judah left. He said, I'm out of here. I can't deal with it. Judah said, I can't deal with the pain, the shame, the guilt. Our dad, Jacob, Israel, moaning and not who he once was, the shame of knowing what happened to Joseph. Judah split. And by the way, this is the Judah that later becomes known as the tribe of Judah. So a major change and a transformation will take place in life. There's a lot of questions out there as to whether or not narcissistic people can change. The answer is yes. Narcissistic people can have changes. Their character does not change. But the ways in which they go about doing things and viewing things can change. Doesn't mean they can change with you. It doesn't mean they can change in your relationship, but in their life, they can change. Judah is a prime example because Judah will become known as the tribes of Judah. And it's not that the character of Judah has changed, right? Judah is always the one who sold his brother into slavery. But becoming known as the tribes of Judah later on is because he implements some very powerful things. So it's important to understand that even narcissistic people, people who are evil, people who do evil things, can ultimately be used by God. So Judah is the one who left. Judah left his brothers, left his family, went and stayed with this man of Adullam named Hira. There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. Now, again, the Canaanite people were people that Abraham was instructed by God to stay away from. So all throughout they do things with people they have no business doing and no business being with. Judah was just that. With the shame and the guilt of what took place, he ran away from home. Now he's involved with a Canaanite woman. And he took this Canaanite woman and started having children with her, had sex with her. Judah had an appetite for sex. Now, it doesn't say, and when I looked it up in the ancient literature of the Old Testament, it doesn't say they were married. It just says Judah had children with her. He didn't take her for his wife. Now, there is an NIV version that says his wife, but I didn't find that in any of the other Bibles, the King James version or any of the others. So I'm not sure that they were married. All it says is that Judah took this woman, this Canaanite woman, and went into her and had children. And it kind of reminds me of Jacob's brother, Esau. Esau also was the hunter-gatherer, the man's man, right? Esau went out and started dabbling and having relationships and kids with these other outsider women around them. And it made their father, Jacob, and Esau's father, Isaac, very displeased. Isaac was very displeased at the fact that he was, in fact, it was mentioned, and we read this weeks ago, where Esau was bringing a lot of shame, a lot of hurt into the family because he was marrying and mingling and having kids with all of these women that they had been instructed not to. They were dabbling in the toxicity of the world around them. And again, narcissistic abuse is a result of what? Being with people you have no business being with, doing things you have no business doing, going places you have no business going. Yet it's very difficult, and we need to keep ourselves in check because we are also just as vulnerable to go out and mingle and associate with people we have no business associating with, doing things we have no business doing. This is it. This is what lands us in a lot of toxicity. This is what brings a lot of pain into our lives. This is what Esau did, and Jacob had to leave. And now this is what Judah's doing. He's running from home, running from the truth, running from his understanding of what he and his brothers did to Joseph, to young Joseph, and instead is now running into the arms of Canaanite women, a different culture, a different people. And so with this Canaanite woman, she became pregnant, verse 3. Again, we're in Genesis chapter 38, verse 3. She became pregnant, the Canaanite woman, and gave birth to a son who was named Er. In verse 4, she conceived again and gave birth to a son named Onan. And in verse 5, she gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib that she gave birth to him. Now Judah got a wife for his firstborn son. And at this point in time, I don't believe was that old. We don't exactly know the age. But her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord put him to death. So the firstborn son of Judah, the Lord put to death. This death could have been natural causes. It could have been, we don't know. It doesn't say exactly how. It just says the Lord put, in verse 7, chapter 38, the Lord put Judah's first son to death. Now, I want you to pay attention to something here. What we're seeing here is life falling apart. When we see narcissistic people, when they do something horrible and they run and they try to drown out their own guilt and their shame by mingling and doing things, oftentimes we get this idea that they're skipping off and their life is perfect. But meanwhile, when we're shut out and we go no contact from toxic people, if we were to follow the storyline of the toxic people who have hurt us in our lives, we would see a lot of this. They live in a place where their family and themselves, even they can experience a lot of curses, a lot of tragedy, a lot of things going on. Their life is not perfect. Their life does not go all that well. Judah here is about to experience the downfall, the consequences of all his decisions and all of his actions. And this is what is going to compress Judah into eventually becoming a better person. All right? It's not that no one individual. No one individual came into Judah's life and changed him and said, listen, you're going to become the tribe of Judah. It didn't work like that. This took an act of God, what we're about to get into. This took pain and suffering being pressed in on Judah by God in order for Judah to ever change his ways. And this is what we are seeing, the start of it right now. So for those of you who have come out of toxic relationships and you wish that they just would have listened to you, you wish that you could watch them change, you wish that you could be a part of them being better people, you've got to understand that most narcissistic people need to detach from you, need to get completely separated from home, and then when you unfollow them, then when you go no contact with them, only then will the Lord press in and compress their lives and shake them down with a lot of hurt and pain. Some of it you may never know about, but only then can they start to have changes made in their life. This is important to understand, and so this is what we're going to see right now. We see that his firstborn son, Judah's firstborn son, was wicked in the Lord's sight. And it doesn't say what his firstborn did to be so wicked. For all we know, it's simply because he was a son of Judah, and Judah was wicked. The fact that Judah sold his brother Joseph into slavery was wicked. The fact that Judah has now gone out and mingled with Canaanite women and had sex and had children without being married, the Lord looked at it as wicked. Judah's life up to this point has been wicked. And as a consequence, the Lord took Judah's firstborn son out of the picture for Judah as a result of the generational curse brought forth by Judah. Verse 8, Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. So Judah is pleading with another son, saying, take Tamar, have children. We need to keep this going. We have been instructed to have children. We've been instructed to multiply. Take your son who is no longer here with us, or take your brother's who's no longer here with us, take his wife Tamar, have children for your brother. But Onan, in verse 9, knew that the child would not be his. In other words, he knew that Judah was telling him, have a child for your brother, not for yourself. So again, Judah is trying to sneakily just do things very toxic. Judah is still a very toxic individual, very narcissistic, very selfish. He's telling Onan here, listen, have a child for your brother. How would you like it if someone came to you and said, listen, I'm telling you, you need to have a child for so-and-so, not for yourself, but you need to do this for so-and-so. You need to do this for your brother. You would probably say, wait a minute, I don't want to do, if I'm going to have children, they're going to be mine. So Onan, in verse 9, knew the child wouldn't be his. So this is what he did. Whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he pulled out. He did the pull-out technique. Verse 9 says, when Onan knew that the child would not be his, whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. So Onan went into the situation, had sex with Tamar as his father instructed, but he did the old pull-out technique every single time. So he went and had his enjoyment of sex, but pulled out and spilled his semen on the floor or wherever. Not allowing Tamar to get pregnant, not giving Judah grandchildren. All right? This is what was going on. And what's interesting is it says in verse 10, what he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. So poor Onan, after he enjoyed his sexual encounters with Tamar, pulled out, spilled semen, the Lord took out Onan as well. And again, was it just the fact that he felt forced to have sex with Tamar and have a child, and he didn't want to have a child? So poor Onan was put in this position by his father, Judah, to have sex with his brother's, who's deceased, wife, to have children, and he didn't want to have children, so he pulled out. Was it selfish on his part to do that? Yes. But was it worthy of dying? No. But what is, according to everything, again, this is the generational curse brought down by Judah. This all goes back to Judah. All of this falling apart, all of this death, all of this selfishness, all of this destruction, all that we see happening here is the Lord's response to Judah, saying, Judah, this is your life. This is what you chose. You sold your brother into slavery. You ran off with Canaanite women. Now you're still trying to run your show. You're having your sons sleep with your daughters and their dead brother. You're a mess, Judah. You are an absolute mess. And as a result, the Lord is taking from him. And again, I want to challenge you to understand this, that even though, and again, nobody in Judah's family that he came from knows this is happening in Judah's life because he left. And I want to challenge you to understand this. When narcissistic people leave you and they move on, don't think for a moment that their life is going great. Things can be turning upside down and breaking, and you would not know it, because narcissistic people do a good job of holding themselves together through this, and I believe Judah is in that same place. Judah is just trying to make it. He's making bad decision after bad decision here. So Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up, for he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. Verse 12, after a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, and again, Judah has had a lot of grief, has he not? He's already lost his sons. The Lord just took them. And again, the Lord took Judah's sons on account of Judah, I believe. Not on what they did, but on account of Judah. It says that the sons were wicked in the Lord's eyes, but I believe that wickedness trickled down through Judah and through Judah's actions, because what Judah had done up to this point was wicked. Does this make sense? So there's no blessings in narcissistic people as they live in their narcissistic ways. Don't look at them as being blessed. They are not blessed. What comes from them is wickedness. And this is what we see. In verse 13, we see when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Tanah to shear his sheep. She took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and she sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that though Shelah had not grown up, she had not been given to him as a wife. In verse 15, when Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. In verse 16, not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, come now, let me sleep with you. Now we see again, there's Judah. And again, obviously, this is where we're going to get the tribes of Judah at some point. But right now, we see nothing but wickedness. We see nothing but this calloused, cold heart within Judah, who sold his brother into slavery, who ran away then from home, who got involved in toxicity with the Canaanite people. He left so far from home. He's had children. He's watched his children now die because of wickedness, the wickedness that has trickled down through Judah and his actions. And here he is still sleeping around with prostitutes. Now, little does he know, this particular prostitute is not actually just some random prostitute. It happens to be Tamar. Tamar, who is dressing and acting like a prostitute. Again, this is the result of being in a toxic situation around toxic people. When you are in the devil's playground, anything is fair game. And Judah is experiencing all of this. So Judah sees, not knowing that it's his daughter-in-law Tamar, the one who he was trying to get his sons to have children with. Come now, let me sleep with you, because you're a prostitute. And that's what I want to do. And what will you give me to sleep with you, she asks. I'll send you a young goat from my flock, he said. Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it, she asked. He said, what should I give you? She asked then for his seal, your seal and its cord, a seal and a cord, some kind of a emblem or something that he wore on a cord. And the staff in your left hand, she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took her veil and put on the widow's clothes again, back into old Tamar. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he couldn't find her. He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road here?" "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute," the people said. So he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said there's no prostitute around there." Then Judah said, "Okay, let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." Watch this. The Lord is beginning to awaken Judah to his own narcissism, his own evilness, his own wickedness, the reason his family has been dying and suffering and falling apart. This is by far one of the most interesting interactions that we would ever have to face and ever have to see, as Judah says this. When people came, this is the Lord revealing to Judah who Judah has been this whole time. This is the Lord getting in Judah's face, saying, "This is you." Here we go. So 3 months in verse 24, right? Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she's now pregnant." Judah's thinking, my daughter-in-law, the one who I was going to have marry my own sons? Tamar, the woman who I'm saving for my youngest son to marry so that he can have our offspring move forward, that Tamar has been guilty of prostitution? Watch what he says in verse 25. As she was being brought out, at the end of 24, Judah said this, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." How dare that Tamar be a prostitute? How dare her? She was to marry my sons and to have children with my sons, and she's prostituting herself. Bring her out and put her to death. This is what we're seeing right now in Judah's actions is the secret double life of narcissists. It's on the outside when they proclaim to be the righteous ones, the righteous judges, the righteous ones to decide what's right and wrong, while the whole time hiding who they are themselves, hiding their wickedness, hiding their evil deeds. They live their double life. They live their secrecy. And this is what we see Judah doing. Judah is proclaiming to everybody, "Bring that prostitute out. She has tricked me and my sons, and bring that Tamar out. We're going to destroy her. We're going to kill her." Meanwhile, he's hiding from everybody that he has slept with a prostitute, except for his own friend, who he told to bring the goat. But this is why he told his friend, when the friend came back and said, "I can't find that prostitute," Judah said, "Okay, listen, we don't want to be a laughing stock. I don't want people laughing at me because I slept with a prostitute, so let's just leave it alone." This is narcissism hiding and running from itself. This is what narcissists do to hide their own shame and their own guilt. Verse 25, this is when Judah's world gets turned upside down. As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said. And she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." And he did not sleep with her again. So obviously, what just took place is that Judah has just now come face to face with his own shame and guilt. He believed that Tamar was out prostituting herself with random people and that she should be put to death for that. But when Tamar came face to face with him and said, Judah, is this not your staff? And is this not your seal? Yeah, I was a prostitute, but guess what? You were the one who took advantage of me. And when that happened in front of everybody, Judah, what could Judah do? He was faced with his own shame and his own guilt over his own actions. Judah did recognize them, and at that moment he said, she is more righteous than I. Judah was faced with his own evilness. Judah was faced with his own wickedness in life. I believe Judah was now at this point starting to begin to see how everything in his life was unraveling because of his wickedness, because of his decisions, because of his living for his selfishness, for his narcissism, which resulted in not only the deaths of his sons, but has created all kinds of chaos in his life. Verse 27, when the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. And again, these happened to be Judah's sons. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread, tied it around the wrist to pull it out. This one came out first. But when he drew back his hand into the mother, his brother came out, and she said, so this is how you have broken out. And he was named Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah. And that wraps up this chapter. But what we are saying is ultimately we're going to get to the tribe of Judah, which is an important part. As we know, later in the New Testament, Jesus is known as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. But the tribe of Judah does become an important piece. But before it becomes an important piece, which is way down the road, we first have to get through understanding the narcissism and the evilness and the wickedness of Judah as an individual, not only Judah, but his other brothers, Reuben and Simeon, and what they did to poor Joseph. And now Joseph is going to be used eventually. We're going to see this in the later chapters. Joseph will be used, in fact, to make Reuben and Judah and all of them bow down to him, but it's also going to unite them once again into the tribes. And so we'll get there. I want to thank you for being a part of Royal We Fellowship as we are moving along and learning more about the toxicity of the world that we live in. And not only that, but how we are to navigate this world. If you would like to support and be a supporting part of Royal We Fellowship, you can do so through PayPal links on the channel description. Again, your support is not required, but inspired. And everybody have a very blessed weekend and a blessed week. And we'll be back next Saturday morning to continue on in our story of Jacob. And watch out on this week for videos on the Royal We channel. Also, if you have not yet, follow me on Instagram at Join the Royal We so I can just share updates about how I'm getting prepared to face fears and do rappelling. And with that, we'll be back next Saturday morning. Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and have a great weekend.